Kirk Steudle. The list of accolades and roles are too long to mention, but I'll certainly begin with when we first met, when you were director of the Michigan Department of Transportation, and a long and storied career since and before, I'm sure, including having served as president of AASHTO, the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, a very important group in the context of the nation's highway and safety infrastructure, highway and bridge infrastructure, and of course the most important issue that goes with that, safety. You've been involved in all of it. So welcome, and thank you for taking some time to talk with InfraTalk America.
Yeah, well, thanks for the invitation to be here. You know, I might add, I did the AASHTO piece. I also did the president of ITS America, and I did the executive or the president of TRB's executive committee as well, all kind of clumped together. So I think I was more of a glutton for punishment than anything else. But frankly, what it did was allow me to get into a lot of different areas of transportation.
It was and at a time when the evolution of technology was particularly ripe. And you personally contributed to advancing it, certainly in this sector, in a very big way due to those roles that you played. And many of us really didn't understand or could appreciate how you could do it all, but you did. Why don't we start with your service as director in Michigan, and give us the sort of parameters, the time frame that covered?
Sure. So we won't go back to the beginning of time, but I was hired as a trainee right out of college to work for the Department of Transportation. Midway through my career, I get an interview to be the deputy director under then Governor Jennifer Granholm, which I did for 3 years. And then in 2006, I became director under Governor Granholm. And then fast forward, she's done at the end of the term. Incoming Governor Rick Snyder decides he wants professionals running his department. I interviewed with him and selected me to be director. So in the end, I was director for 13 years, deputy for 3 out of a 32-year career. So half of my time I sat as number 1 or number 2, which when I got hired, if you'd have told me I was going to spend half of my career there, I would have said, you're nuts. There's no way I'm ever going to do that. That's just not in the cards for me.
And I remember at some point I heard the average life expectancy of a state CEO is about 3.5 years.
Yeah, I think it's 28 months.
So 13 years is an extraordinary achievement.
That's right. Yeah, I saw many people come and go. There was a couple states that I never bothered to learn the new CEO's name because I knew they were going to be gone in 6 months or a year. And it was like, yeah, whatever. Let's just move on.
I had the pleasure of watching you work first when I first served as a deputy commissioner of Maine DOT, and then, of course, my years at Federal Highway. So I saw you from several vantage points, but the leadership roles you played were significant. Let's talk a little bit about that. So we mentioned AASHTO and your services as president. Do you have any reflections on sort of every AASHTO president has an emphasis areas that they identify, and looking back, are you excited about the progress we've made on your emphasis areas since those early years?
Yeah, you know, my emphasis area, if I remember correctly, was technology, which shouldn't surprise anybody that knows me. I've been all about technology. And, you know, look around this show today, right? There's companies here that didn't exist 10 years ago when I was the AASHTO president because the industry hadn't even started yet. And I know that my Michigan DOT staff would roll their eyes when I would be in a speech to them, and I'd reach inside my coat pocket and I'd pull out my phone. And I'd say, look, I applied for this job and filled out a Word document on this phone that went to the governor that hired me for this job. I said, why do we make somebody go to an office to get a permit? I said, we need to use technology, right? So the staff would roll their eyes about, oh, here he goes again. But it was like, look, this was 10 years ago. I said, we've got to figure out how to harness technology for the good and use it to make us more efficient and make us better.
I was over really the last 5.5 years since I retired from government.
It's changing so fast.
It's been remarkable. And the first 2017, when I retired and first started my business, my focus was I wanted to continue the work we had done under Everyday Counts at the Federal Highway and find a way I could retire and do so from the private sector. So that was the goal of Infrastructure Ventures. How do we engage with the private sector and help, as we like to say, building bridges between private sector innovators and infrastructure owners.
Right.
And you did a lot of that back in those days, because by definition, engaging with technology solutions by definition means engaging the private sector. And as the pace of technology changes so rapidly, that's more critical than ever.
Yeah, it sure is.
You, with your experience, particularly going back to the very beginning, you've had this lifelong experience working with within a state DOT and with other state DOTs. We have, one of our overarching question this year that we're posing to national leaders like Congressman Larson and Administrator Bott was how do we move innovation in the Federal Aid Highway Program? We have 52 individual institutions who do things 52 very unique ways in some cases. So the opportunity to essentially accelerate the deployment of innovation on a national scale is literally a door-to-door exercise.
Yeah, it really is. You have to go back to
advice.
Our foundings as a country was set up as 52 little autonomous countries called states, right, under this federal umbrella. And it's easy to forget that. But when you work in this arena, as you point out, and you know from your time at Federal Highway, that the state could do something completely different and just say, oh, well, that's great, federal government, but I don't want to do it that way. And they have the ability to do that. So then the question is, to your point, how do we get technology, things we know are going to work? Well, the best way is to have examples where it worked, right? And that's where I think, and you mentioned Everyday Counts was the perfect example, because what it was not theoretical. It was projects that had some innovation that frankly is ready to be mainstreamed in 30, 40, 50 other states. You just needed a spotlight and say, this is what's going on. We both saw,
used to say, proven, tested, but underutilized.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
right.
we all can name, some technology or some innovation that worked really well, but then we saw somebody else doing the exact same research and came up with the same result. That's like, oh, but that was a waste of time and resources. We could have started from there, and you could have built on it and made it further and made it better.
Two of my favorite examples of what I call the market power of state DOTs. One was from 2010, the first round of Everyday Counts. It was warm mix asphalt, which at the time represented about 4% of national asphalt production. I did an interview last year with the head of the National Asphalt Paving Association, Dr. Audrey Copeland, and she said the percentage of warm mix of national asphalt production is over 40% today.
Oh, really?
And in a number of states, upwards of 80% is standard. And just as a quick side note, the benefits of warm mix asphalt range from reduction of greenhouse gas emissions to the ability to pave later in cold weather states. You can
fuel savings.
You can transport at longer distances. All of those things. So when I first got briefed, I said, "What are we waiting for?" And then what it came down to was the industry worked very closely with Federal Highway on the initiative, and they needed to see that market develop. They needed to see that commitment from state DOTs before they would invest in the plant equipment necessary to produce it on a regular and predictable basis. Fast forward, it happened. So it was the state DOTs simply deciding to do it that essentially created this impact. So they're equating the 40+% of warm mix asphalt production to about, the savings of a couple 100,000 cars a year off the road. So that was one example The other is more current. It was EDC6 and it was e-ticketing. And we were very involved with, a matter of fact, one of our alliance partners, a company called Hall Hub Technologies, that really went to the mat, provided resources and helped launch the National E-Ticketing Task Force. And our entire mission was to support the state DOTs who had decided to pursue it, largely because of COVID and their immediate need to get people away from one another. So paper tickets, climbing up on trucks, exchanging information was simply not acceptable. So they just decided, let's find a way to make, and the result, again, long story short, is e-ticketing, which we produced two, what we call them InfraDocs. They're mini documentaries on the subject. So go to InfraTalk America and find those two InfraDocs, and they'll give you a pretty good sense of the antiquated nature of what we used to do and what we're doing now. All because state DOTs decided it had to get done. So the ability to make a national market is extraordinary. How do you leverage that as we try to find ways to advance technology solution and others?
You know, that brings me to a current project I'm working on. It's an NCHRP project. It was the National Transportation Vision Framework. But part of that, and some people in this crowd will hear it termed the moonshot. So how do we make something 10x better than it is today? One of them is technology. And it's not about incremental increase, but it's about the moonshot that says we really need to get here. So the first couple steps are, here's how we're going to test fire the rocket, right? Here's how we're going to get to orbit. So we had 13 applications that came in from states. It's very similar to Everyday Counts. They're spending, in this case, they're spending their money. They're doing their projects. But what this is doing is highlighting things you could do. So technology, energy, access to opportunity, reconnecting communities, mobility marketplace, a whole broad range of ideas. And there's 13 states that are coming forward saying, I've got one that I want to do. Again, it's their money. They're doing it. But this is about putting a spotlight on it that says, here's how you can leverage it. And I anticipate there will be a number of states that as they listen to the update as it goes on over the next year, they're going to go, well, we can do that. And it really goes back to that premise of everyday counts. It's like, you just got to get somebody to do it and say, yes, we can do this, and now let's do it differently.
It's our motto, every innovation begins with a conversation. So true. And AASHTO has always provided that national leadership. But the innovation comes from the states. And right. we always have to remember that. So a big focus of ours.
And that's really the challenge for Federal Highway is how to engage a state and saying, hey, I've got a really good idea at Turner, Fairbanks, or wherever to engage a state to say, yeah, I think we could put that to practical use here, and then it will take off. If it just stays in the research realm, it's a nice report.
You've had, since you left office, you've worked in the private sector on technology. When you were in the public sector, particularly your role at TRB, I remember you were one of the leading voices in vehicle-related technology. I tend to keep my cars for a long time. So last year I bought a new car with all of the fixings, as I like to say. The technology in that car, and I'm now officially an elderly driver, there's no question it provides multiple layers of safety for my own driving ability.
Yes. Adaptive cruise, lane centering, lane keeping, all of that stuff, right?
Got it all.
Yeah.
And I can envision a time when the entire fleet is transitioned to that technology and what an impact that's going to have on highway safety. At a time when we're experiencing, ironically, when I served at Federal Highway, and this is by no means cause and effect, but when I served at Federal Highway with Victor Mendez, when we were running Federal Highway, it was we had achieved the lowest fatalities during your service.
Right.
On the highways. And come, post-COVID, and we're obviously going very much in the wrong direction. Is technology ultimately the solution?
So I think, yes, you remember those early conversations about automated vehicles, connected vehicles, and the NHTSA report that said, 90% of the crashes can be eliminated if the one thing that causes the crashes is eliminated, which is the driver, right? Now, it doesn't mean all of them. There are still going to be things that happen, even if it's complete automation, right? And I know that there's listeners that are freaking out right now going, whoa, it's like, no, nobody's talking about taking your fingers off of the steering wheel anytime soon, but just saying, if you think about that moonshot that says, well, what if, right? What if that isn't an issue? Well, there's a significant reduction in fatalities that relate to that. Now, is it realistic we're going to get there in our lifetime? Probably not. But we're going to progressively get closer and closer. As you said, now you have those technologies. You probably will not have a car without those technologies. I know I personally won't. I'm on my second car with adaptive cruise. I will never own one that doesn't have adaptive cruise. And why is it? It's because maybe I'm not always attentive. Right? And it's slowing down for me. And it could be, look, I'm looking at the deer on the side of the road. I'm looking at whatever, or I'm daydreaming, right? It's not that I'm texting.
Correct.
But it's those technologies that are going to help drive that down. There's something that hasn't been quantified, but this is anecdotally, as I drive down the highway, it seems to me there's more drivers that think they're driving in a video game. Because, when we learned how to drive, you passed a car, you looked in the rearview mirror, and when you could see it, it was safe to pull over. Well, there are so many instances where that car passes me, and it's 3 feet in front of my bumper, and it's going like this, because in the video game, that's what you do. And I really think the proliferation of auto video games has changed auto drivers' capabilities, particularly during COVID, when the traffic speeds went up. There was nobody on the road. People were all over the place. It's just the driving habits changed during COVID.
To me, the ability that exists today to equip the highway system with technology that could literally enforce speed laws, and as municipal budgets are taxed and it's difficult to retain and recruit police officers or law enforcement in general, I think there's going to be an absolute essential necessity to find ways to manage speed using technology. And somehow I think the American people, I remember those back in my day when I was involved with, when I was at Maine DOT, we got a federal grant to do a red light running study. And the results were scary, extraordinary violations. And we took the results of the study to our state transportation committee. And it was pretty clear that any action as a result of that study was probably not imminent, right, shall we say. Yeah. That somehow, the politics of not giving people some reasonable opportunity to violate speed laws was somehow un-American. But I think we're getting to the point where that's going to become essential, that the technology in the car and the technology of law enforcement will essentially necessitate your having to comply with speed laws.
So about the same time, or maybe a little before then, there was a similar conversation going on in Michigan, and they actually introduced a law that prohibited us from even studying red light cameras.
There you go.
And nope, you can't even look at it.
That kind of reaction, exactly. And I think it's inevitable that somehow technology is going to have to be the solution. I mean, to the point where your vehicle speed will be controlled by the technology.
It's a big one. It's capable. I just think, as you ran into in Maine, and what I've seen elsewhere, is that I don't think American society is going to do that. I mean, look, I was in Sweden with Governor Granholm. This would be 15 years ago, and she was late for a meeting going from Stockholm to Gothenburg. And she said, "Hey, can we step on it?" The driver said, "No." "Why not?" He said, "Because there's speed cameras and I can't violate the speed limit." Well, that's Sweden, which has a very strong safety culture.
Right.
And just try moving that into your favorite state in the United States. There's only a handful that would agree with that. The rest of them would say, yeah, no, you're not going to monitor what I'm doing. So technically, I absolutely agree with you.
Brother.
Long term, we got a long time before that's going to happen.
Very long time. In the meantime, I think the technology we are experiencing is giving drivers more information, more cognizance, if
Right.
you will, of that, how they're driving and where, and the technology is helping to influence their behavior.
Right.
At least it's helping to influence mine.
Right.
It's no study, it's my own personal experience. And my wife similarly got a new car with the same technology. So we've both absolutely become believers. And as you said, I think over time.
You know, I had a vehicle about 2014 that didn't have lane keeping. It had lane alert, so it would beep if you went out of the line. And I remember getting it thinking, I'm really annoyed. This thing is always going off. And then I went, okay, why is it really going off? It's going off because I'm bumping up against the edge of the line. And I said, okay, well, maybe I need lane keeping.
There you go.
It would just nudge me in.
So all of this and the work that you've done and other state DOT officials have done with the auto industry over the years and the engagement that AASHTO has facilitated, all of that has produced some very good results. So to me, it's constantly an effort of every innovation beginning with a conversation. I mean, one of the other focus areas that, or we call them our targeted technology sectors that we have is sustainable composite structures. And matter of fact, Michigan has some
right.
experience, you personally, in that area. But clearly, from the standpoint of the bridge engineering community, still a long way to go before something that, a departure of that magnitude is going to become sort of standard. It's growing. We're very pleased with the results, very active with the American Composites Manufacturing Association. They have something called the Transportation Structures Council that's specifically focusing on how do we expand the use of composites in transportation infrastructure, not just bridges. Seawalls, there's a number of column wraps, and it's been in use for quite some time. But, the transition to using composite technology for bridge structures is a big stretch for some.
Right.
But we're beginning to see some real interest, particularly local governments, where if you're going to build a painted steel girder bridge in a local community, then it's rated to last 75 years. That assumes you're going to maintain it properly for the 75 years, which, of course, local governments can never do because they never have the resources. Right. Bridge maintenance is an expensive proposition. So the possibility of, particularly the small, medium-sized bridge market, for the most part I'm talking about, there are opportunities there to put stuff in the ground that's simply going to last longer, be more sustainable. But the process of getting that conversation going in 52 different states is a challenge. So,
Greg, you said something a minute ago that I think is really important, that a lot of times research is expensive, so it gets poked at by government committees or whatever. Well, what did you get for it today, right? And I maintained when I was DOT director and today that, look, if you can't take a percentage, 1%, 0.5%, 2%, some percentage, and invest towards something that's better in the future, then we are destined to stay in 1990 forever. If we just rebuild what we've been doing since 1990, it's going to be the same thing. Well, in 1990, we changed from what we were doing in the 70s, largely based on research. And I think every agency anywhere in the country can put 1% away, 0.5% away into some kind of innovation that's advancing to the future. The challenge will be, as you know, not every innovation pays off, right? So it's, public sectors are very risk averse. So we've got to get over that, or we're going to be destined to stay in 1970 forever, 1990.
Truer words were never spoken. And you have been in this sector an innovator for many years and a leader in many years.
Not dead yet.
Thank you for your service, to say the least, and happy to see that you're still active and engaged in helping states and AASHTO move in advance a very important initiative. The visioning initiative is quite impressive.
Yeah, that's fun. You know, I really want to spend this part of my career helping the next generation of leaders not repeat the same mistakes that I learned from, but to take that and go forward and figure out the next mistake, right? Make the next mistake so somebody can advance.
Well, one of the things we're hoping to build here at InfraTalk America is a platform that will provide people just like you an opportunity to share those thoughts and continue to influence. We call it Pearls of Wisdom.
There you go.
Where we bring people who've had some experience together to just talk about some of the challenges that are facing today's agencies and today's professionals. Some extraordinary challenges that we simply didn't face in the days.
And extraordinary times because there's actually money to do some things. And I think that's the challenge now is there's money. We can't just do what we've always done. We need to take the opportunity to do what's needed for the future and make those investments and make those calculated decisions and investments along the way that are actually different and provide maybe a little different outcome.
When I first became Deputy Commissioner of Maine DOT, one of the first things I did was get to know AASHTO. And the Safety Lou Reauthorization Steering Committee, chaired by none other than your friend and mine, Will Kempton, who is a member of my board today. He's still involved and active in trying to advance innovation. And so I got involved. Little did I know it would take 10 years to reauthorize Safety Lou. By the time it was reauthorized, I actually became the Deputy Administrator of Federal Highway. So there were 10 years of 32, I think the number was, of continuing resolutions. Extraordinarily impactful 10 years in terms of holding us back on the resource side. So EJA, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and the resources it provided have been an extraordinary boost to our industry. The problem is, in 3 years, I think we're going to have to do it again.
We absolutely going to have to do. I've been an advocate that said, look, if you look at our percentage of GDP that we put into transportation in the 60s and the 70s compared to where we are now, the IIJA got us to about that same investment level. That investment level has to stay constant after this. I know there's a bunch of people thinking this is one and done. No, it's not. It's going to be one and continuous because that's the level of investment that we need across all infrastructure across America to really keep us in the game.
Well said. And again, Kirk Steudle, thank you so much for taking some time to speak with us.
Thanks for the invitation. It was great.
And we hope you come back and
Sure.
talk with us on a regular basis.
Good deal.
Thank you,
Thanks,
sir.
Greg. See ya.
Take care.